Welcome back, everybody. This video is about metaethics. The prefix meta means to look at something from a higher, more abstract level. Metaethics is a standard for choosing ethical theories. There are many different ethical theories out there, and metaethics studies how do you choose between them. Here are some examples that we're going to talk about today. Subjectivism, conventionalism, divine command theory, natural law, and social contract theory. The first question that we'll be answering is, what if there is no universal morality? The idea of morality is that it would apply to everyone, everywhere, always. But some people argue that there is no universal morality. Instead, they argue for what's called subjectivism or subjective relativism. On this view, morality is subjective. This means that morality is relative to each person. Each person has their own morality. So what's right or wrong for me might not be right or wrong for you. It could be that I don't believe in lying. I believe that lying is morally wrong, but you believe that lying is sometimes morally acceptable. For a relativist, that's okay. If you lie, it's okay, and if I lie, it's morally wrong because we each have our own separate standard. The moral truth is different for each of us. The difficulty with this theory is that if it's true, there's never any basis for criticizing someone else's behavior on moral grounds. You can't say that someone is good or evil, right or wrong, because they might just be using their own standard. That's considered a problem with this view because arguably the whole point of morality is to be able to judge whether or not other people's behavior is acceptable, and subjectivism throws that out. A second form of relativism is called conventionalism. This argues that morality is just social convention. This means that each society has its own moral code, conventional relativism. The difficulty with this view is that if different cultures have their own morality, then there's no basis for criticizing another culture. Imagine that the nearest country oppresses minorities and has laws which restrict the rights of women. You wouldn't be able to criticize them because you'd have to say, well, even though here that's morally wrong, where they are, it's morally right. This becomes a particular difference where one country's behavior is starting to affect their neighbors and is just clearly wrong, like the treatment of refugees or Nazis, for example. Next, we're going to look at metaethical theories which attempt to answer the question, if there is a universal morality, where does it come from? The first is called divine command theory. This is meant to be complementary to faith. Many of the most famous philosophers were also theologians, deeply religious people who spent their lives trying to come up with rational bases for their faith. So again, it doesn't compete with faith, it's just a different way to approach these questions. According to divine command theory, morality comes from moral directives which come from a divine source. The divine source can be a person, a book, an institution, an entity. The idea is that there's a moral authority which tells us what is right or wrong. The next metaethical theory is called natural law. Here, the idea is that moral laws can be identified by looking at nature. When they talk about nature, sometimes they talk about human nature, sometimes they talk about animal nature, sometimes they talk about physics, Sometimes they talk about the nature of spirituality. Sometimes they talk about the nature of logic. The idea behind this is that we can learn what is morally right or wrong by examining natural features of the universe. The next metaethical theory is called social contract theory. On this view, moral rules are determined by mutual agreement. The idea is that every one of us is actually selfish. However, we've realized that the best way to live happy lives is to cooperate with other people. So in other words, even though we're all selfish, we're also rational, so we can plan ahead and decide to give up some of our desires to achieve longer-term goals. All of us have an agreement to cooperate. Even if during your lifetime you've never actually gotten together with people and agreed to follow morality with them, the idea is that you've accepted this agreement, which was written by our ancestors long ago, simply by not leaving your current society. So in other words, society has rules that we all agree to, and if we want to opt out of them, then we have to leave our society. The idea that these rules are legitimate, that they're ones that we should actually follow, not just when someone is forcing us to, is because we all have the opportunity to participate in government. We all have the opportunity to help shape those rules and to change them. On this view, there are no moral authorities. On divine command theory, the first metaethical theory, the moral authority was divine. On natural law, the moral authority was nature, some aspect of nature. Here, it's just what everyone agrees to make society work. On all three of these metaethical views, it's interesting to think about what they tell us about the law. There is a very big distinction between morality and law. One of the ways we can see this is that many laws are regulatory. They're not prohibitions. They don't say what is right or wrong. They just give us a way of organizing our behavior. So for example, it's not morally right to drive on the right-hand side of the road. There are countries where people drive on the left-hand side of the road. They're not morally bad. What would be morally wrong would be driving on a different side of the road than everyone else. That would lead to all sorts of problems. But the idea that everyone drives on the right-hand side of the road isn't inherently moral or not. It's just a way of organizing ourselves. Other rules, for example, ones requiring that there be 2 witnesses to solemnify a marriage, well, those are arbitrary. They tell us how to do something legally. In this case, you have to have 2 witnesses, but it's not that it's more moral than having 1 witness or 3 witnesses. It's just a practical decision to let people know what standards they have to follow. So, in some ways, law does stuff which has nothing to do with morality. Another reason to think that there's a difference between law and morality is that there are very real differences where they disagree with each other. For example, some things are legal, but they're not moral. Imagine cheating on a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Morally, you could argue that that is wrong. Legally, however, it is totally innocuous. There's no law against cheating on your boyfriend or girlfriend, even though it may be morally wrong. Also, some things are illegal but moral. For example, jaywalking. Jaywalking is crossing when it's not at a sidewalk or at where there's a clear crosswalk marking. People do that all the time. Does that mean that they're morally bad people? In other words, some laws are so unimportant that they don't seem to have moral implications. Some people would argue that speeding, if it's just a little bit over the speed limit, is also not morally wrong, even though it is very clearly breaking the law. So, if some things can be legal but not moral, and some things can be moral but not legal, what that tells us is that there is a distinction between law and morality, and it's never as simple as saying that this is moral because that's what the law says, and it's never as simple as saying this has to be legal because this is what morality requires. Thank you for watching.